of a cloud deployment. And the cloud misconfiguration in simple terms, simply just incorrect settings that you may have or over permissive settings. So examples include public storage, missing multi-factor authentication, open ports, unencrypted data. And usually one of the key indicators that cause this misconfiguration is human error. Human error is one of the leading causes of cloud misconfigurations. I'm going to go ahead and perform a demo to show you how easy it is for misconfiguration to occur in the cloud. So like I talked about, we have curated environments in Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure. These are test environments. And before I start clicking, I want to be very clear. This is a controlled demonstration in a non-production environment. The purpose is not to teach you how to expose data. It is to show you how quickly and unintentionally a misconfiguration can occur. From an audit perspective, the question is, how would we detect this? How long would it exist? And what evidence would it show? So I am going to switch and share my screen and go to my AWS Management Console. So I'm going to share my screen here. Let's find the share button. Share my screen. I'm going to share. And we're looking at what's called the Amazon Web Services Management Console. In Amazon Web Services, there's a very popular service called S3, Amazon Simple Storage Service. Matter of fact, if you Google S3 breaches, you will find a lot of them because traditionally they were public by default. So I will go ahead and create a bucket in S3. So we're going to type in S3 here to launch our Amazon Web Services. And then we can go ahead and create a bucket. So what are we gonna call our bucket? Let's see, ISACA webinar bucket 1. If you scroll down the settings, we have a settings labeled block public access settings. Traditionally, this was enabled, but now you have to actually go here and disable it. But imagine, you have someone in your environment who's not paying attention. They might uncheck it, thinking, they're doing something else, and then it tells you turning off block public access might result in this bucket becoming public. You say, I acknowledge. You come down here and you create your bucket. And it's creating my bucket. Creates my bucket. I'll go here and look for my bucket. Let's see where my bucket is. ISACA webinar bucket 1. So say I've created my bucket in my organization. I want to upload some files. I'll click upload here. I'll go add files. So I'm gonna add my Coca-Cola secret recipe because I want to be on the cloud and be modern. I wanna add my company's social security numbers and credit card numbers. I'm gonna add those files, and then I'm gonna upload. We have our Coca-Cola secret recipe and our company's social security numbers and credit card numbers. So we have a situation now where we have a bucket that's public that has our secret recipes and our PII information. Do you all see any type of problem with this? So this is how easily a misconfiguration can occur in the cloud. So what auditors should be thinking is, from an audit perspective, how would we know this has happened? Can we rely on a screenshot? Would a cloud security posture management solution detect this situation, a publicly accessible S3 bucket? So we're gonna go back to the slides. So I'm gonna stop sharing. And we're gonna go back to the slides. This misconfigurations occur very often. So this misconfiguration should not be treated as isolated technical issues. From an audit's perspective, these are symptoms of how poorly or well security controls are operating. So we have other misconfigurations you may see in the cloud. For example, public exposure of data services. This point to weaknesses in secure configuration baselines or change control. Another misconfiguration that we commonly see, this is one of the most commonly seen misconfiguration, is missing multi-factor authentication. In fact, in the cloud, all your accounts should have multi-factor authentication. And in particular, your root users, your powerful users, your admin users. Lack of multi-factor authentication points to weaknesses in identity and access management controls. Another misconfiguration we see is unrestricted network access security rules. This points to weaknesses in network security and lack of encryption. This points to weaknesses in your data protection and encryption controls. Another misconfiguration we see, very common, these are the top misconfiguration you'll see. Excessive access permissions. This overly permissive access policies point to weaknesses in your identity and access management, in your list privileges and access review controls. Last but not least, insecure default configurations. You will see this a lot. Admin secure build and deployment standards. Like I said, auditors are not auditing each individual misconfiguration as a standalone control. We're evaluating, does the organization have secure configuration standards? Is there automated monitoring? Is there timely remediation? And we're using these misconfigurations as evidence of how broader controls are functioning. That is the shift we're looking at. The second blind spot I want to talk about is the shared responsibility model. Many organizations often assume that because they're running in the cloud, security has been handled by the cloud service provider. That is an assumption that is not correct. There is a model in the cloud referred to as the shared responsibility model. It delineates what the cloud service provider responsibilities are and the cloud customer. In reality, the cloud providers secure the cloud infrastructure, the underlying infrastructure. The customers remain responsible for securing what they place in the cloud. There's a misunderstanding, and this creates audit gaps. So typically, cloud provider is responsible for your physical data center, your underlying hardware, your hypervisor, your core cloud services, and the customer is responsible always for identity and access management, regardless what service model you're using, whether you're using SaaS, PaaS, or IaaS, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. You're responsible for encryption and key management, secure configuration, logging and monitoring, and also data classification and handling. Exposed. So implications for us as auditors is the provider is compliant, but we should also evaluate. Do we have customer-defined security standards? How we're monitoring these configurations, how misconfigurations been detected. So in summary, remember, cloud service providers secure the platform. We as customers, the companies, organizations you work for, secure the configurations and data. The auditors, us, we validate the customer side as well. Let's go ahead and look at the third blind spot that we normally see is over-reliance on point-in-time sampling. Traditional audits were built around testing controls at a single point in time. This approach works very well in static on-premise environments. Like we talked about, the cloud is dynamic. We talked about ephemeral. We talked about multi-cloud, all these different services constantly changing. So point in time looks like a screenshot of a configuration, one-time export of a setting, sample size, 1 day worth of evidence. This tells us what's true at that particular moment. But like we said, the cloud is constantly changing. We have these services that deploy today, tomorrow they're not longer there. Why this becomes a blind spot? Because cloud is constantly changing through automation. We have things, services, technologies called CICD, continuous integration, continuous deployment. We have the ephemeral workloads. So we have a false sense of assurance if you're relying on point-in-time evidence. So auditors may unknowingly provide assurance based on a very narrow window. So what modern assurance looks like is, instead of asking, was this control configured correctly today? You should be asking, is this control continuously evaluated? Are there automated checks? Do we do repeated evaluations? So make sure you do not rely on point-in-time sampling, and we move towards continuous monitoring. So we are moving away from once a point in time from snapshots to signals. And then we'll go ahead and look at our second poll. Let's take our time out to look at this second poll. What's your most common security issue you see in the cloud? There's overprivileged identities. We have public exposure, maybe your buckets, your endpoints, incomplete login, encryption issues, and shadow cloud. So shadow cloud is a situation where you have users within your organization creating cloud environments that are not managed within your environment. It's very easy for it to occur in the cloud because the cloud is accessible to anybody. So it's very easy for any of your users to bypass the procurement channels, go into any cloud, put in a credit card and create an account and start uploading data. So please answer these questions and then we'll review. Okay, we'll give it about 30 more seconds. I see the results are streaming in. In 20 seconds, we'll go in and see what the results are. 10 seconds. Okay, let us look at the results of most common blind spot or security issues you see within your reviews. So we have 48, almost 50% on identities. We see this a lot. Public exposure, login is a very, very common issue as well. Shadow cloud is 27%. And the last is weak key management. Very interesting. So, what we usually see in this poll, whenever we do it, is identity often ranks high because cloud environments make it very easy to grant access, but very hard to right size it. We have accounts that can accumulate privileges very easy. Also, public exposure tends to show up a lot because we showed you a very easy misconfiguration that can occur one open bucket or maybe an overly permissive security group. For example, in AWS or Google Cloud, whenever you create something called a virtual private cloud, it's public by default. So unless your IT organization, your IT folks know to go ahead and secure that, you might have a publicly accessible virtual private cloud. That's why it's very important whenever you're auditing, say, how your organization is creating infrastructure in the cloud, you want to look for things called automation. They should be using technologies called infrastructure as cloud, where they're creating templates that create standardized infrastructure throughout, and they're not creating it manually. That's something you want to look for. Logging is also a big one because logging is frequently treated as optional. Most people, it's like insurance. Nobody thinks much about it. But without logs, we lose visibility. Encryption, kind of low on the totem pole, as we can see here. And again, shadow cloud persists because anybody can spin up cloud. If you don't have technologies in place to prevent your users from creating cloud environments, you don't have things like data loss prevention and other technologies, it's very easy for your users to bypass your environment and create their own cloud environments. So let us go back and continue with the presentation. So we'll talk about why checklist audits fall short. Again, we talked about traditional audits based on relatively static environments. Cloud is dynamic, ephemeral, highly automated. Checklists tend to validate, sequentially whether control exists, whether it's continuously. In the cloud, a control can be compliant in the morning and drift out of compliance by the afternoon. So this checklist heavily rely on the point-in-time evidence we talked about, the screenshots, configuration exports, and this cannot reliably give us the evidence we are looking for. So now that we've talked about all these blind spots, what solutions do we have? Traditional audits verify the controls exist. We don't verify that they're enforced. Enforcement matters much more than documentation. So let us look at the solutions in action. So one of the solutions we want to talk about for this unique problem we have here is something called cloud security posture management. So cloud security posture management is the practice of identifying and remediating security risks across cloud environments. And the tools and technologies that perform this are referred to as Cloud Security Posture Management Solutions, or CSPM. CSPM solutions continuously assess cloud environments. They identify misconfigurations, they drift, they centralize visibility, and they enable us for auditors to get continuous evidence. These benefits of Cloud Security Posture Management Solutions. First, as auditors, we gain centralized continuous evidence. We reduce our reliance on manual screenshots. There is compliance mapping improves because we'll go through a demo, you can see the different compliance regulatory standards you can map, such as SOC 2, PCI, any other compliance regulation, probably you can map, they're all defaulted within the various cloud environments. So when we talk about cloud security posture management solutions, we have two broad categories. We have what we call the cloud native solutions and the third-party solutions. So cloud native solutions are built and integrated directly into the cloud service provider's infrastructure, right? So they are designed to provide seamless native security capabilities within a specific environment. So for instance, the popular ones we have in AWS, we have Security Hub. In Azure, we have Microsoft Defender for Cloud. If you work with Google Cloud, we have something called Google Cloud Security Command Center. And third-party solutions are provided by independent vendors. So some organizations prefer to use third-party. They're very compelling if you operate in multi-cloud. If you're in AWS, maybe you're in Google Cloud. If you're in Azure, you might want to use a third-party. And some of the examples we have is Prisma Cloud. If you've heard of a solution like that, by Palo Alto, they've actually changed their name. They're moving more towards AI. There's also Wiz. There's also CrowdStrike, Falcon. So there's various solutions out there. So we as auditors don't really care what the solutions are being used. What we care for is, are the controls being monitored? Is evidence being captured? Does the organization have a process? So I'm going to go ahead and perform a demo of Cloud Security Posture Management so we can see how we can leverage these solutions. I'm going to do, again, AWS and Microsoft Azure so we can actually see in action how we as auditors can utilize this tool. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, and we're going to go back to my AWS Management Console. So let's share the screen here. So in Amazon Web Services, we have a service called AWS Security Hub. So if you type in Security Hub, there's actually a service called Security Hub CSPM, Cloud Security Posture Management. This is a solution we as auditors need to leverage. So this solution is very good because it's inbuilt into AWS. If you're using AWS, more than likely you'll have this service. The first thing we as auditors want to do is ask the organization, our stakeholders, is Security Hub or any other similar solution with similar capability enabled? If it's not enabled, then we have a continuous posture assessment issue that we might have to document, right? That alone is a control consideration. So when we bring up this solution, I recommend starting off at the summary page. So in the summary page, we have a lot of information here. So we have security standards. You can see all the security standards that the organization is mapped to. Again, this is my test environment. We are mapped to PCI DSS 4 and 3.2. So if you're in the credit card industry, they might be useful to you. We are mapped to NIST 853. That's another regulation standard out there. You can also see findings by region. You can see we have 8 critical findings. We have 42 high findings, 340 medium, several, how do we deal with this as auditors? We have most common threat types. We have other information here that we can look at. There's a lot of useful information that we can review as auditors as we leverage these tools. I'm going to provide my recommendation on which areas you want to look at. So one of the areas, you want to look at as an auditor is, we are trying to see how this map to our common audit domains like identity, logging, network security, encryption, right? So I recommend you start with the findings feature. So in the findings feature, we have the name of the finding, the severity, the region, and you have the resource itself. So this is system-generated evidence. These are not screenshots. These are not interviews, right? We as auditors care who generated this evidence. When was it generated? What does the result look like? So when we look at findings, we can actually, there's a severity here. We can classify by severity. So I'll go from critical to low. You can see the first finding that we have is MFA should be enabled for the root user. This is very critical finding. If you find this within your environment, you should immediately document it. And you can kind of look down through the different findings to see if there are patterns. So if I scroll down, I start to see patterns, repeated identity and access management findings. We scroll down here, security groups should not allow unrestricted access to ports. Another MFA, security groups again. Repeated exposure findings, repeated encryption findings. So what these findings indicate is systemic control weaknesses. And this can support our risk conclusion. These are not one-off mistakes. So the bottom line here is you do not need to know how to configure AWS. What you need to know is, are the controls enabled? Are they evaluating configurations? Are they producing evidence? Another feature I recommend you look at is security standards. Like I said, both these platforms have security standards embedded into them that you can map to your own standards. So we have a CISA AWS Foundations benchmark. We have, again, PCI DSS. We have NIST 853. So we can say, look at PCI DSS, and we see the different findings, the controls that have failed and passed, mapped to the findings within the cloud environment. And you even have options here to download. You can download the findings and you can see exactly what controls they map to. So if you want to see which exact control this map to PCI DSS, 421, you can go ahead and map that directly. Next, we'll look at how we can use cloud security posture management in Defender in Microsoft's Azure. So we are going to go to Azure environment. This is my Azure portal. In Azure, we have a service called Defender for Cloud. Again, we're going to use the same logic. It's a different platform, but the same methodology will exist here. So the first question we're going to be asking the stakeholder, is Defender for Cloud or a similar solution enabled? Again, if not enabled, then you do not have continuous assessment. So that's a control consideration. For Defender for Cloud, I recommend starting with the overview page. Okay, here we can look at various information. We have security posture. We have recommendations. We have 8 recommendations that are high, 25 medium, some that are low. And if you look here, what I've done with my Microsoft Defender for Cloud, I've also integrated my AWS account. So Microsoft Defender for Cloud is a multi-cloud cloud security posture management solution. So you can integrate your Google Cloud environment as well. So I have findings from both my AWS account and my Azure account, which is good. And I can look at each. Regulatory compliance, you can see we have SOC 2, we have NIST 800-171. If you're in the government space or the federal space, that might be a mapping you might want to look at. You look at workload protections. We have inventory. You can see what's healthy, what's unhealthy. And then one area I recommend, a feature you look at is recommendations. So here are my recommendations. Again, you see what the risk level is for the recommendation, what the name of the recommendation is, what the affected resource is. And again, we can categorize by risk level. If you want to just look at AWS or Azure findings, say we want to look at Azure only, you can see we have the findings for Azure subscription. SQL database has vulnerabilities, that's a high. We have some medium finding there. Again, what we're looking for here is the organization continuously identifying control gaps, right? What are they doing about it? Is this system generated? Is this a thing that we can use that's repeatable, verifiable, and auditable? And then next, I'm going to show you another feature that you can use that's really neat. So under cloud security, we have regulatory compliance. So in each of these cloud environments, even in Google Cloud, they have regulatory compliance features, and you can map your various regulatory standards rather than by service or resource type. And for auditors, this is very important because when you typically think of control objectives, we don't think about individual configurations. So again, if we look at our standards, we have 7 standards that are listed here. And then we can see we have NIST 800-171. We have SOC 2. We have PCI DSS, again, ISO 27001. So I'll go ahead and select SOC 2. SOC 2 standard, which is very popular. I think a lot of organizations perform SOC 2 reviews, either externally, internally. So we can look at our various control objectives within SOC 2. We can see which ones have failed, which ones have passed, and this is systemic evidence. This is not an individual telling you, yes, we have MFA enforced. No, we do not. Yes, everything is encrypted, all our databases. So let's dig in to say CC 6, logical and physical access controls. So maybe let's see what controls have failed here. We see CC 6.1. I'm sure you're all familiar with some of this terminology. Logical access, role-based access has failed. We have other failures here. And then you can actually dig deeper and see what the failure is. It tells you they should be, the detail of the failure. And from an audit perspective, what I care about is this evidence, not a policy document. So another thing you could do is from this screen here, you can actually download the report. So you could download, say, SOC 2 report. I'll download it here. I have my SOC 2 report here. So I can come here and look at what my report is, which controls have failed, which ones have passed. How useful would this be when you're actually doing, say, an external assessment, you're prepping or you're assisting, you're core sourcing, or you're doing your own assessments? You can validate what the stakeholders are telling you versus what you're actually seeing on the cloud environment controls, right? So you can actually use this as a leverage and support your audit conclusions and finding. So these results include which resources were evaluated, what condition was checked, whether the environment currently passes or fails, and this is very important. So this is how you can actually, use this type of solutions to support your audits. Key takeaways: we are just not mapping policies, to this specific standard. We are going from show me your SOC 2 policy to show me how your environment is continuously meeting SOC 2 control objectives, right? So the key thing I've talked about this before, we don't really care whether the organization is using AWS native tools, Azure native tools, third party. What we as auditors care about, are these controls enabled? Can we evaluate the configurations? Are the findings generated? Are they being tracked? Are they being remediated? So evidence quality is the primary concern here. So the biggest shift for us here is we are moving away from show me your policy to what does your environment look like continuously. That is what I call modern cloud assurance. I'm going to go back to the slides. So we want to talk about practical techniques we can utilize to modernize our audits as we go and summarize, this entire presentation. First and foremost, organization must establish a robust cloud governance framework. Auditors, we assess whether the governance model is well-defined and operating as intended. So we want to be sure we are validating the presence of cloud policies, standards, and guardrails covering identity, network, data protection, logging. We've talked about all these different attributes, right? We want to confirm governance bodies exist. Most organizations, you may have a cloud center of excellence. You may have different organizations that in charge of cloud. Make sure that they are working on reviewing, your governance policy, your governance documents, and they have a methodology, for risk management. The second thing we want to look at is we want to validate shared responsibility mapping. Again, like I talked about, the shared responsibility is a model where it delineates whose responsibilities are where. The cloud service responsibilities are owned by the cloud service provider and ours are owned by the cloud customer. So you need to ensure that for each cloud, you understand how those responsibilities are, regardless of service model, like I talked about. We also want to verify that internal control mappings align to this model and that no control assumption rely on the cloud service provider defaults. Thirdly, we want to leverage cloud native capabilities, right? Like I talked about, we want to use these cloud security posture management solutions to obtain direct real-time evidence. You want to evaluate how these tools fit into risk assessments, issue management, and audit testing. Fourthly, we want to move towards continuous assurance. We're moving away from point in time to continuous assurance. Rather than doing annual or periodic interval assessments, we want to validate automated control checks. We want to look at, policy as code, things like are the controls set up to alert, detect, any drift or misconfiguration. Another thing we want to incorporate is validating our high impact controls. We want to prioritize testing of controls that historically drive down the most cloud risk. Like we said, everything is risk-based. So we want to make sure we're looking at all the different categories from identity and access management, encryption, network exposure, and confirming these controls are consistently enforced across all cloud environments. Last but not least, we want to build repeatable audit procedures. So we want to establish standardized audit programs, testing steps, and evidence collection for our cloud environments. We want to ensure these are documented. We're using the tools, that have been provided. And we also want to upskill our auditors with foundational cloud knowledge to effectively evaluate these modern cloud environments. In closing, cloud changes the environment, not the obligation. It demands for us as auditors a smarter audit model. So we'll go ahead and kind of summarize. If you need some additional resources, these are also available on the materials windows. Here's some additional resources I have about cloud. I have some courses on LinkedIn Learning. I have a cloud security and audit fundamentals in AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. There's also a building and auditing a cloud security program, including artificial intelligence. AI has become a big, big deal. How do you audit AI? It introduces a lot of risks as far as model poisoning, as far as the information we are exposing to these AI systems. And by the way, most AI systems are on the cloud. OpenAI is on Azure. You know, if you're talking about cloud on Anthropic, they run on AWS, Azure, Google Cloud. So that's another consideration to look at. Another course you can look at, additional resources. I have courses too on cloud security posture management in AWS, Azure, Google Cloud. You can easily find those courses by searching my name, Michael Retemo. And for the traditional folks who like to read books, we also have a book we published, Cloud Auditing Best Practices, with the CISA Cambric. So feel free to leverage those solutions and resources out there. So for any contact and follow-up, if you ever like to continue this conversation around cloud governance, evidence strategies, or evolving audit approaches, I'm always happy to connect in either way through LinkedIn or these methods here. Feel free to reach out. Happy to connect and collaborate. Here's a QR code. And also these are available on the speaker window, my contact information. If you need to connect with me on LinkedIn as well, here's the QR code. Feel free. And thank you all for your time today. You know, my goal was to share patterns and practical approaches we see while working across organizations. So like I said, every cloud environment is different, you know, but we can modernize our methodologies and move forward towards these techniques we've talked about. So thank you very much. I'll be happy to take questions next.
Yes, and we do have lots of questions, audience. Please note if your question is not answered today, please contact Michael. As he said, all of his information is in the speaker window. First question for you here, I'll be showing it on the screen for everyone's visibility. Continuous monitoring has always felt like a second line function, not something that internal audit should be completing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, as auditors, we have responsibilities, right? So there's different lines that we have. So we have, like you talked about, it's usually an afterthought, but we have the first line that's management. Then you have kind of a secondary line that's risk, you know, security oversight, and then us coming as internal auditors, right? So with continuous monitoring, we want to make sure that the organization itself is identifying these misconfigurations and they're doing something about them, meaning either mitigating the risk or fixing the misconfigurations, right? So we want to make sure they have a process that validates the controls are working and they're remediating this process. So even though it looks like a secondary feature or something like an afterthought, it is something we as auditors have a responsibilities to perform.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. What about addressing, pardon me, CUECs in SOC 2 report? This covers customer controls IAM with the cloud vendor. Kindly clarify.
So yes, so like I talked about earlier, so there's something called the shared responsibility model. So the shared responsibility model delineates what responsibilities the cloud service provider has and what responsibilities the cloud customer has. So when you're looking at a SOC 2 report, the CUECC are responsibilities that the customer themselves have to address. So you want to make sure that while you're looking at that SOC report, you're also going to the customer and making sure they have validated those controls that are specified within the CUECC, because a lot of times they may be either carved out of the SOC 2 report. Very, very important to get a good picture of your assurance window. Okay, I see another question here.
Oh, forgive me, I was on mute. Forgive me. I will repeat the question, Michael. Thank you. Do you see a concern where the cloud provider has citation reports whereby tenants have no visibility of what happens behind the scenes? They give an example, the lack of runtime OS and network logging at EOS level, or unregulated break glass access where staff have privileged access to SaaS level.
So yes, we as auditors do not have visibility in what the third party, the cloud service provider, is providing to us, because a lot of times we don't have access to the environment. We're relying on their attestation. So there are various things you can do. I've seen, depending on the kind of relationship you have with your third parties. Sometimes you may have a right to audit. If you have, please exercise that. You may have ability to see other reports, say like their pen testing reports. You may also be able to, I suggest this a lot, maybe interview, discuss with the stakeholders themselves directly if you need more assurance, behind the reports. But primarily we are relying on those reports from the cloud service provider.
All righty, next question here. Where's that on the screen? Do the cloud compliance standards come preset in the clouds, especially regulatory ones, ready for a client to simply enable like the CSPMs, or do clients set them up from scratch?
Good question. So these standards are already preset within the various cloud environments. I know AWS does not have as many as Microsoft Azure. Microsoft Azure, last time I looked, there were over hundreds. There's even like standards like PIPEDA if you're in Canada, GDPR. They have a whole compliance set. And Google Cloud also has similar. So you do not have to set them from scratch. I do know you can also customize them if you have to, but for the most part, they're already set up for you within the cloud environments. Very good question.
Do the Azure or AWS validation tools include the capability to check against CIS standards criteria?
So that's a good question. So the CIS standards, the AWS tools, there's a different feature where you can check the CIS standards, because we have the CIS standards within some of those solutions. I think, let me see if I can bring up my AWS environment. I believe we might have, I'm going to share my screen again here so we can look at the security standards we have. Here, let me share the screen. See if we do have the standards to do. Screen here. So we do have CIS standards right here. So yes, we do have the ability to review the CIS standards. You can see the various, this is, I think, the latest one, CIS 3.0. We can see the results. We have 38%. Here are the controls that failed and the controls that passed. So yes, very good question. We do have the ability to benchmark against these standards, and it's a very good way for us to be able to support our audit. I'll go ahead and stop sharing.
To what extent can Purple Team assessments be leveraged to evaluate cloud security controls, and which type of test scenarios provide the greatest value?
So when we're talking about a Purple Team assessment, we're talking about red and blue team assessments. So I think the first thing as auditors, we should start by confirming, if there's that Purple Team program in place and we're not relying on ad hoc testing. And we might make sure if they're doing a Purple Team assessment, they have mapped it to recognize the models. So maybe the MITRE attack framework or any of the other models that are out there, make sure that they're validated, their scenario, their response outcomes. And, we don't necessarily validate the assessment by rerunning the scenarios they did, but we can validate the governance, the evidence, and the detection outcomes around the program.
Do you have any thoughts on how to audit containerized environments running on Kubernetes managed platforms like AKS or EKS?
Yes, so this modern technologies, there's various ways we can audit them. Again, there's CIS standards that provide the best practices on how you can look at something like a Kubernetes from an architecture diagram, how the clusters look like, identity and access management. So you can review that. You can review where the evidence sources are gotten from. You can also use some of the tools we provided in, if you look at Microsoft Azure, it has a way you can integrate. I'm going to see if I can share my screen real quick. I know we're running out of time. You can integrate some of your container environments to be able to get evidence against in the Defender for Cloud. So let me see if I can pull up my Defender for Cloud so I can show you here. And this is actually something that you all can actually look at. Let me share my screen. In the security posture, regulatory compliance. So let's see here. Share my screen. Show you where you can look at this type of information. Entire screen. Okay. So Defender for Cloud, you see how you have the different environment settings. There's a way you can go here and set up connectors, for various. You see, we have Docker Hub here. We have DevOps connectors. So you can integrate your environments into this Microsoft Defender for Cloud, and it can help you actually audit this environment. So yes, we do have the ability to do that. Go ahead and stop there.
Okay, fantastic. Someone did ask, does CSPM come with AWS subscription, or does it require additional subscription? I wanted to make sure I asked that.
It depends on the subscription you have. Sometimes it may require an additional subscription from the organization, but your discussion to them should be, the company has invested a lot in the cloud. They should be able to invest in continuous security posture management or some type of solution to where they're able to manage, their configurations and their risks in there. So some of the tools come by default, depending on the subscription. There are other tools you could use, like AWS has Trusted Advisor, Azure has Advisor. It really depends. A lot of times they are integrated within the solution, or, it might be an additional component they need to add.
Fantastic. Well, wonderful presentation, Michael. Those demos were very useful. I saw a lot of thumbs up while you were sharing them. So we appreciate all the work you put into this presentation. If you haven't already, be sure to fill out the session survey. It's located in the platform toolbar at the top right of your screen. We'd love to know how you enjoyed this presentation today. If you watch the required 50 minutes, your CPE certificate will automatically appear in the ISACA CPE record section of your ISACA account. It can take up to 48 hours for the CPE credit and certificate to be added to your CPE manager. This webinar was recorded. It'll be available on demand within 48 hours. Locate the on-demand recording from the virtual events section of your classroom within the ISACA Learning Access page. This webinar and the information contained in it are not intended to or directed for distribution or use by any person. Again, we want to thank Michael for his time, expertise, and great information today. To everyone who joined us live and will join on demand, thank you for your attention and participation. And most importantly, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again, Michael. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. My pleasure. Have a good day.